to Geared for Growth, the podcast where we dive into the meaty end of property and occasionally take a few cheeky swings along the way. Now this episode, it's a bit of a reunion. I'm joined by Kieran Clair, property journo, ex-valuer, media whisperer, and someone I mercilessly mocked the last time he came on. And true to form, I opened this one by doing it again. But we get stuck into some serious stuff too. The state of Australian property journalism, the death of investigative reporting, media agendas or lack thereof, the rise of AI content in journalism, and whether you should trust that property expert with a Lambo and a crypto balance. It's a sharp, insightful, and at times hilarious conversation about who's shaping the property narrative and whether we're still getting the truth or just a headline designed to get clicks. Let's jump in. Kieran Clair, thanks for joining me back on Geared for Growth.
My pleasure, Mike. Pleased to be here.
It's been a while between drinks, and I think the last time I had you on, I sort of trashed the property journalism space in Australia, of which you are an esteemed member, and I see no reason to abandon that tradition today.
You're a brave man, because the property journalism space in Australia has been very good to you, or at least some of them have.
Some of them have.
I would appeal as someone who was helping as best I could to get you in front of them.
I regret it now.
Oh well. You know, should have thought of that before you paid me.
Should have.
I maintain my stance that, and for listeners, I am not making this up, Mike would be one of the best natural media commentators I've ever seen. And the hard work was always breaking through that wall. But when you've got people in your little black book, or when you're in their little black book for an interview, they keep returning to talent. You got to keep returning to people who are smart, they're good on camera, they're good on the mic, they can think off the top of their head. Just all of those ingredients, and that's something that you have. I had a few clients like that, and you were one of them. I'll say I wasn't going to start this with a compliment, Mike.
Well, I mean, I'm really taken back because I threw shade at you from second one, and then you just went and complicated. You complimented me, so you've that's really.
I mean, you're a pain in the ass, but other than that. The media stuff's good.
Let's call pain in the ass the theme of the episode today, because let's talk about the property space and property media. I've finished a number of podcasts either as a host or a guest, and the end advice was don't read the news if you want to understand property. Now, that must be a little bit disappointing because you're not just a journalist, you're actually a qualified valuer and you had an esteemed career in the space. So you do know actually what you're talking about. You're a property investor, you're a Renaissance man. So for me to tarnish all journalists under the same brush might be a little bit unfair. But are you unique to the property space with the background that you have?
I think, yes, I am. I haven't run across too many people who've crossed over from high-paying professional roles. I'm not being facetious in that. Valuation is a good specialist role to be in and can be extraordinarily lucrative. But I found myself exhausted by process, surrounded by high-level professional discussions, all things that are fine. But also I was frustrated by the fact that every day people probably weren't getting the information given to them in more digestible ways. You know, if you sit around with a group of valuers, and God love them because my best mates are valuers, but start talking about property and the average listener is just going to, after a while, it's like, oh, yields and, you know, just that's how it goes, of course.
Discounted cash flows.
Yeah.
Internal rates
what's an IRR?
Yeah.
And so I mean, apart from making sure I maintain my own sanity, I just wanted to see what that place looked like where you could have that discussion. And so property media seemed the place to go. Now, not hilariously, well, maybe slightly disturbingly, I sat at one stage in a news area with property journalists and I said, you know, we should really do a story on suburbs that are high yield. And one of the journalists turned to me and said, what's a yield?
Oh, dear.
And that was actually a moment where I sort of went, oh, okay, so there is a There is a
breadth of
line here
talent.
that's not getting crossed regularly. Yeah.
Mm.
There is a knowledge. There is a Venn diagram that is not where the gap is not being filled here between people being a journalist and their depth of knowledge and how that is communicated. And I'm stumbling with my communication, but it was a complicated place to be in.
Journalism, I believe, is critical to a well-functioning society, especially investigative journalism. And it feels like the golden age of investigative journalism has passed, I suppose, because if you drill down on return on investment and efficiency, investigative journalism is difficult to plead a case for. Is that the reason why we aren't seeing some of that hard-hitting stuff anymore?
No, it's resources. Well, it is just return on the dollar. So again, sitting in News Corp, because when I was the year at the Courier Mail, so it's 2017, I'm in the Courier Mail, and one of the executives from News Corp down in Sydney came up to do a presentation to the whole room, and sort of his opening statement at that stage was, so Facebook and Google are generating at that stage are generating 60% or are taking over 60% of online ad revenue, and we've got 20. And there was almost an audible gasp from this room of journalists who were like, it was one of those moments where I was going, fuck, they don't realize. It's like, it's become so entrenched that journalism is something that's paid for. And then Harvey Norman takes care of a lot of stuff for News Corp, I guess, but the money isn't there to fund someone to spend 2 or 3 years, becoming a mole and digging in deep and ingratiating themselves with their sources to produce these fabulous pieces of hard-hitting journalism. There's a moment that's tipped over there where it just doesn't make financial sense to do it. And as that's grown, I mean, now I was trying to run the stats earlier, and now Google and Facebook make up 75% of online revenue, and then the next highest in Australia is realestate.com.
Yeah, right.
So and they make up 10%. So News Corp makes up like 2% of online revenue. Who's going to give them the money to go and do those hard-hitting pieces? Well, where are they going to source it? They source it from subscription models.
Yeah.
And people don't want to pay for news. I maintain we are getting the media landscape we deserve at the moment in some ways, because people want stuff for free. And if you want stuff for free, you're just going to get people who are producing content for the sake of marketing something else. They're going to make their money elsewhere. So unfortunately, that's where you get, I mean, everyone can have a YouTube channel. Everyone can have a podcast. Nothing wrong with that. Free and fair discussion. But the problem is the agenda that comes along with it. And there's plenty of people out there who are producing content whose agenda isn't to take care of clients and isn't to educate the public. It's to funnel more leads in to sell their properties. And not all of them have the scruples to do that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you opened the topic of agenda, because I want to ask you about the agenda when it comes to some of these big media brands. Obviously, you've got people like Rupert who have been accused of taking over the world or trying to, or, having reptilian blood or being part of some oligarchy. I remember this is around about 6 or 12 months ago. I had probably 3 phone calls from a journalist about Anthony Albanese's personal investing. One was, what would be the capital gains tax discount and tax position on his Dulwich Hill investment property that he's selling? There was another one about what would the after-tax position on his Copacabana investment property on the Central Coast. So there were 3 stories all in and around either negative gearing, capital gains tax, which I think was the media's attempt to start the conversation in the lead up to the election cycle, because I think a lot of people said, oh, negative gearing wasn't really in this election. I'm like, no, it just was a lot earlier than people realised, and it fizzled out pretty quick. And I think Labor Party was very nervous because Mr. Shorten lost 2 elections, you could argue, on those policies. Where is the impetus for those stories to come out? Is that down to the journalists themselves, or is there someone from the top that's sort of saying, look, we've just got a little bit of a tap on the shoulder from the Liberal Party, so let's run this sort of angle for a bit? Like, does that sort of stuff happen?
So in my experience, no. And I reckon this is one of the great pieces of misinformation about how media works, particularly in the property space. I can't speak for people who are doing the political run or the courts or whatever, but no one ever told us what to write about. We just had to find stuff that was interesting. The metric we were driven by was audience, eyeballs, engagement, clicks. So that's where you've started to sort of see the more sex sells type of stories, anything that was a bit provocative and tantalizing. And, you know, real estate by nature isn't probably sexy, but it's interesting. So I would say that's where the impetus for those stories come by. Never had anyone tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, you should write a hit piece on Peter Dutton's portfolio.
Right. Trump's got some great policies, hasn't he, Kieran? Yeah, that'd be good to hear about.
Wouldn't you like to write about those? Well, certainly, maybe I was so far low down on the totem pole that it didn't reach me. I did have, I would have an editor who would tell me if a story was good or not, but she was an exceptional journalist, had 20 plus years experience in the field when I was working there, never told us what to write. And so the journalists themselves had to come up with the stories that worked. Now, the challenge is things driven by search engine optimization, things driven by clicks and audience mean that you've got to sit there. I jokingly said at one stage, I should just write the headline "Naked Kardashian draped over car" and then just write whatever dross I wanted to underneath it. Because apparently that's going to get me clicks, you know. Right. But of course that's not good journalism and probably not great for my moral standing either. But I think that you'll find those sorts of stories, yes, are driven by the journalist trying to get more eyeballs, rather than have a serious conversation about the pros and cons of taxation, which is unfortunate.
It is disappointing.
But that's what the audience is like. The audience wants free copy. It used to get paid for by advertisers, and the journalists could be. I miss that filter. I miss the journalistic filter. And the problem is now that in the era of Trumpism, etc., journalists are painted as this sort of evil group of liars, and they aren't. They're hardworking professionals.
Fake news.
I know. I mean, look at the term; it's everywhere, and they aren't. They're hardworking professionals who don't get paid nearly enough money for the amount of passion that they put into their jobs. And so I'll champion them till the ends of the earth, but we live in an era where free news is not as good as paid for news.
I want to ask a question about sort of journalistic oversight that enables journalists to go after, you know, the clicks and the eyeballs, but is probably misleading to the end consumer and how we get a balance. To give you a bit of an example, I remember, I don't know if it was the December month, but the property market, I think, posted 1 month of declines, and the media was, you know, property market crashing or property market crash imminent. And then in January it went back up, and they're like, property market resilient and property market, you know, shows signs of strengthening. I mean, one data point doesn't make a trend line. I think anyone really kind of knows that. But is that where journalists can maybe take it a little bit too far, as go like, well, this could mean something, let's just say that it does?
Yeah, well, what you're seeing there is, again, journalists, well, there's the other element here too, is that content volume is important. So journalists have to produce volumes and volumes of stories. And again, if I can think about when I was back in 2017 Courier Mail, we had agreements in place with realestate.com across the whole organisation, where the real estate desks of the various papers had to produce a certain number of stories a week that could not only end up on news.com.au, but would end up being fed through to realestate.com.au.
Yep.
So you would come in and they'd say, okay, so everyone has to produce, 7 stories a week across the 5-person team. We've got to produce 35, might have been 40 stories a week. Mm-hmm. I came from a feature writing background. My first job was at Australian Property Investor magazine, where they would give you 4 weeks to write 3 stories. And I never knew how good I had it there.
Yeah.
But you're sitting there on a Friday thinking, I haven't quite made quota. What's out there? ... ABS stats come out. Apartment prices have gone up relative to houses. Oh, apartment boom. Let's go. What can we do? And you'll write a story, and the story will have the correct information. It'll probably have some good sources. At least mine had some good sources, and all of that. But then you've got to produce a story. It's no good if it sits on the site and no one clicks on it. So what's the most provocative, most tantalizing headline you can attach to that? And it will be something like "Ride the rocket to the moon" or "Property crash imminent." I don't think that's great, but I think that those journalists are competing for eyeballs in an increasingly crowded space. And sometimes they're not helping the crowded space because it's a volume game and you've got to work quickly, turn around and get onto the next thing, before your Wheaties have even digested some days.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you would know necessarily, but is it the same with publicly funded organisations like the ABC and SBS? Is it a similar kind of impetus, or because they've got a charter, they've got funding, they've got more latitude to be careful with the stories?
I think I have a lot of friends who've worked for the ABC, and I think that's a totally valid point. I think that the caliber of journalism that comes out of there is terrific. It is balanced, and of course, there's an attack made from both sides of the fence. I mean, if both ends of the spectrum are attacking you, you must be doing something right. Is probably the old adage to that, and I think the ABC does cop it from both sides, and that's totally about funding and their ability to spend a little more time on the story. Now, the ABC journalists I know, they've got their own personal biases about where they sit. Everyone assumes ABC journalists are all left-leaning. I mean, probably there's a large number of them that are. Some of them are great capitalists also.
Come in, have a seat. I just need to move my Che Guevara T-shirt. That's what I picture happening when you go and visit one of them.
That's right. I'll put away my Anarchy in the UK album and listen to what you've got to say.
Sorry, that's a Lennon bust. I'll move that out of the way.
Don't mind it. If it's been smashed with a hammer, then you're in the right-wing ABC journos office. Okay, so just remember that. I think it's a great organisation. I think that it will have its challenges though, because increasingly, from what I hear about organisations, ABC in particular, but others, is that funding is going to, they've got to fight for every dollar of the funding. They will bring in more commercial management in some of these cases to try and make it a bit sexier or make it earn its keep. And that can be detrimental to the calibre of reporting. It's a constant struggle, the balance between profit and good journalism, I've found. And the only things, people like us can do, Mike, is continue to look for good stories and feed them through to journalists and show them why it's good and interesting and there's an audience for it. And I think you, and hopefully me, have done that enough times that you become a trusted source of producing great topics for journalists.
I think so. And there's certain, I mean, I'm glad you sort of talked about personal biases, because that was the next way I was going to go. Like we've dispelled the myth that like Rupert's coming in saying, Kieran, can you write something to say that, Dutton's an absolute legend? Obviously that didn't work. But the personal biases, I mean, every now and then, like we'll put a story together. It might talk about what I do as a profession. And if people are reading that, they're like, oh, that's really interesting. I guess that guy knows what he's talking about. So if I need that, I'll call that person. So there is an in-baked bias. But I mean, at the moment, we've got a story about the difference between building approvals and building completions, and that gap has been widening over the years for different reasons, and that kind of feeds into the national story about housing affordability. And I truly believe that helps to enrich the debate. It probably sounds very grandiose thing to say, but that's what I think good journalism should do, is just arm people with information to have better conversations. But on the personal biases sort of thing, obviously we know you've got to deliver something that gets the clicks, it gets the eyeballs, but everyone is brought up in a different way. And I've heard that there are a couple of things that journalists have in common. One is that they're typically not as high paid as some of the professions, like we talked about, like valuation or anything in the property services. They typically will live in the cities because, that's where the office is. That's a very expensive thing to do, to live in any capital city, much less if you're not a highly paid person. So that can kind of feed into this idea that, housing is unaffordable. And it does sort of feel like there's a fair amount of press that talks about the housing system, demonizes investors as part of the reason why everything's too expensive. And then, every now and then you'll get a story where, this person, worked at KFC for 5 years. They got their first deposit at 19 and now they're 26 and they've got 8 properties. And it sort of sounds like it's coming from an uplifting side, but then you read the comments, which I think there's just people that do that as a sport. They go in and go like, this is crap. And obviously you had a grandfather that croaked and gave him $1 million. I want to try and unpack that if we can. The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Yeah, look, it's hard to get away from your lived experience. So if you are a journalist who is struggling to make rent or to secure a home for your family, certainly that's going to feed it. But I sometimes think good journalists, that perspective comes from an idea of, if this is happening to me, surely it's happening to others. Yeah. Can we explore this a little bit further? And if they live, particularly if they live where their audience is, then that's a totally valid approach to take, I think.
Yeah.
I also think that there's a bit of a problem with attention spans too now, of course. The rise of the influencer, and you're an influencer, but I've yet to see.
I'd really rather
I've yet
not
to see you do a dance on a beach in front of do it on a selfie stick. Anyway, but that sort of 5 to 10 second or quick cut kind of engagement where people are on the bus or on the loo or whatever they're doing, where they're sitting there flipping through their phones and they want to see shorthand videos of whatever, is dulling our senses to the deep stories in many ways. And we've got a generation brought up on it, and how interesting. You might have done it with your kids, but my kids are in their teens now, and we've educated them as much as we can about property. My wife's a valuer, property professional as well. And we talk about property all the time. Yeah, my son comes to me and goes, hey, this guy's talking to me about how I can buy 4 houses by leveraging high cash flow properties to continue to borrow money and so. He's able to come to us as parents and say, why can't I do this? And we're able to explain very quickly why you can't do that. I feel sorry for the parents who haven't got that sort of exposure and are going to rely on, the answer to that isn't a 5-second video. It's a long form discussion.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we're we're missing out on if we continue to ignore or cheapen the value of good journalism, good long-form journalism.
Yeah, and I suppose who's the guardian of that? Is it maybe the ACCC or something that, stops people from providing information that might not actually be legally correct, or that they don't have the expertise to provide advice on? Who's watching that swimming pool?
There's crickets. No one really. I mean, the ACCC, yes, and I suppose when you talk about the financial services has obviously become a bit more regulated, but certainly in the property space, there's no guardrails beyond associations. Now, you sit on the board of Property Investment Professionals of Australia. I'm on the board of the Property Investors Council of Australia, which looks after sort of special interests of investors. We do a lot of work with the Real Estate Buyers Association of Australia. And, the code of conduct, the guardrails put up by those associations are often the only interference running between good and bad advice that's put out into the public domain. So when you talk about those sorts of organisations and the important role they play, they're crucial at the moment because there is no one else regulating or stopping someone from hanging a shingle and calling themselves a buyer's agent expert. I had a great... when I was a valuer, I recall a conversation listening to a bloke who had been in the industry. He was 20 years my senior, and I was a young man. He got a call in about 2006 from a client, and I could only hear his side of the conversation, but he was sitting there. He's going, "Yes," he was a fantastic bloke. Yes. No, I see. Oh no, you want to value? Oh no, you want it up. Oh, you made a lot of money on your last purchase. Could I suggest you were bloody lucky? And Dave kind of, my valuer mate Dave kind of nailed it right there. People get bloody lucky in property. There's some tried and true rules, some great fundamentals for you to build your fortune and retire comfortably. I absolutely think it is not difficult. Yet the number who jagged a boom market and got lucky with their timing and then went, I can do this. I know how it works. I'm going to help other people do it. They're one run of interest rate rises or collapsed mining boom away from ruining people financially. And that's the scary thing, that there's no regulation around that apart from what the associations are doing.
Yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect, confirmation bias,
the confirmation bias is hideous in this industry. And behind the velvet rope, the things you would see, again, working at the magazine, very high profile developer who I won't name for fear of ending up in court, who we did stories on and did a lot of comments around, and he was talking about his new project and just the things that they do to make it a great investment opportunity. Yet when not on the record, I sort of said, "Oh, so what do you think of these?" He goes, "I'd never buy one of these."
Right.
He said, I would never buy one of those units we're making. It's long-term options, and you're sitting there going, I can't.
It's horrifying.
Yeah, I can't say this out loud, but this is the people in the industry who are getting a voice, and it's either they're either stupid or evil, and in that those people are exhausting and scary to me in the industry.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's no sign of them disappearing.
Well, there's money to be made, mate.
Oh, absolutely, and that's what drives it.
Speaking
of money, journalists they're very enamored by the idea of being paid for their work, but there are new alternatives that don't seem to want to be paid. Enter ChatGPT. There's probably a lot of people that have ruined barbecues you've attended by saying, "What do you do?" And then they said, "Oh, AI, you won't have a job in a couple of years, mate." Has that transpired? And what's your response to something like that?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting space. So when my business partner Nicola and I, when AI came out, we were doing a lot of article and blog writing for people.
Mm.
When ChatGPT did that, you remember that couple of months, and I can't even remember the year, but there was like this February, March, where in 4 weeks the world got turned on its head by ChatGPT, and everyone's going, "Oh my gosh, look at this! It's outrageous! It's so good." I had, I reckon, 8 blog writing clients at that stage, articles, and I lost 4 of them immediately.
Yeah, right.
Like that week, they said, "Oh, we don't need your services any longer." And I knew them well enough to say, I'm not going to argue. It's ChatGPT, isn't it? And they were like, "Yeah, it is. We can not pay you, $350 an article. We can do it for free." 2 of them came back 6 weeks later and said, "This isn't good. It's not. It doesn't know our voice. It can't do what we do, and the statistics are wrong, and blah blah blah." So I ended up picking those people up. A couple of them came back, and I said, "Oh well, you had the special founders rate fee earlier. Of this is the new rate, which you should be.
You've been naughty, and it's going to sting."
Which was true. It was like, "Oh, you've been with me for years. You dumped me, and now you're back, and this is actually what I charge people." Yep. What am I finding with it now? That's continued to evolve, and there's different AI models that can produce content. It has got better. I would climb on and say absolutely. I continue to say, though, that nailing people's voice and being the safety net for information remains paramount when you're producing content. So I've gone from being a never touch the ChatGPT, never touch the Claude AI and all the other models kind of zealot, to now I use it for, I produce all of my content. I'm proud to say I write all of my content for my clients now. I will then go to an AI model and say, "Can you please spell check the grammar?" And I'm open to you giving some thoughts on these sections I've highlighted that I don't think I've quite nailed. And then going through and doing another rewrite, almost like a sub-edit of what I've got. That's number one. Number two, I've also done the experiment where I've been writing about particular suburbs and said, "Can you give me a median house price in each of these suburbs? Write me a paragraph, give me a median house price for each of these suburbs and the average yield, et cetera, et cetera." It's produced it. It was out by hundreds of thousands of dollars on the median house prices for every single one of them. And I sort of went back into REA and did the research and made sure that it was correct. It says to me that there's still a wide gap between relying 100% on a tool like that and what a human can do who's willing to put in the hours. And I think our role is going to become more and more being the gatekeepers of content that is produced in some capacity by AI. I don't see it. Everyone thought by now every journalist would be out of a job. There were CCADs that were coming out not long after ChatGPT was live that were seeking sub-editor for AI content production.
Yeah, right.
In renowned publications, or at least well-known publications. And those jobs aren't being advertised like that anymore. I think that publications have realized you can't just put in the 5 prompts and produce some sort of caliber of output. And if you are, you're doing yourself and you're doing your audience a disservice.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, I've identified issues myself. I mean, I asked ChatGPT to write a little bit of a script for a video, and we were talking about the household formation rate, and it gave 2 different prints. I said, "Didn't you say it was 2.5 earlier? Now you're talking about like based on 2.1 will be this," and then it just writes back, "You're absolutely correct, Mike. I'll fix that up." I'm like, well. Like, where were you on like getting it right the first time? And what else? Like, I've picked that up. What else have I missed? You can't like sort of say like you've absolutely biffed that. Now I'm worried about the whole thing. Like, is there anything else wrong? And it's like, I don't know.
No. The other thing which I mentioned before is voice. People have their own voice when they write.
Yes.
Now, I've done a lot of ghostwriting of articles for people. It's very common in the industry, but it's not like the client comes along and says, "Write me 5 articles." Like it's a very collusive process where you're talking to your subject or your client. you're getting their information, you're getting their perspective, and then so that they don't have to sit at a computer for 2 hours and produce the article, I say, well, I will do it, and then you can read it and change it and approve it.
Yep.
It's very much so. I'm always quick to say, because again, misinformation is that ghostwriters do all the work. They don't do all the work. That's just not true. Except maybe Trump's. Anyway, I've kind of lost my train of thought with where I was going.
The voice.
The voice, yes. Sorry, the voice. That's right. Everyone has their own voice. Some people are conversational and humorous. Some people are high-end professional. I've got one client that I work for at the moment who has thrown out all the rules of grammar
Right.
when they write. And he is easily one of the most difficult people ever to write for, I've ever written for. So much so that I can take dictation from him, write around the same dictation, and then when the edit comes back, he will rewrite the sections that he's already written because they don't sound like him.
Right.
But he has such a unique style that if you were reading an article by that person, you would be able to tell without his name on the top of it time and time again that it's his voice and his words, his approval. And voice is important. People form a connection to the voice, to the emotion that's conveyed.
Yeah. And that's something I've personally witnessed as you being very gifted at able to do. And I think anyone that has maybe like an interesting voice, or like certainly a humorous voice, I feel like you're much more excited to adopt that kind of persona than, the hyper technical one. And I guess everyone's different, but it must be energizing when you're like, oh, this is kind of like how I would write. Like I can get into this.
Well, the funny thing is when you do write for someone like that, often the people I'm writing for are far funnier than me. And so getting into, I do enjoy that. I'm energized, as you said, by it. And you try and get into that headspace. How would they write? And you come up with an anecdote or some sort of phrasing that you think, oh, I kind of really nailed that. Getting into that headspace is funny. I mean, to get a little philosophical, there's moments, it's like that flow state that people talk about. You get into a flow state where you can put yourself, you can become that person and kind of produce that content almost beyond your own capabilities in a way. I don't know if I'm communicating that very well, but you sort of try and get that headspace. It's like sometimes, mate, it's sometimes like when you front up at a party. Some days you front up at a party and you are the center of attention and every word is gold. And then other days you're just not feeling it. You're stumbling and flailing and it's no good. And you never know why. You don't know why. Did I have too much caffeine? Should I have had the donut at lunchtime? I don't know. And I think that when you're on with an article, when you're writing something and you're in that space and it's coming so easy, it's actually a real joy. And sometimes you read back your stuff and you go, who wrote that? Oh, me. I can't believe it. It's really cool. I'm really pleased with how that turned out.
I think you're right, though. The voice is so critically important. Like there's certain things that you could read, and if you know the personality, suddenly you start hearing them reading it to you in a way. And I think ChatGPT, like you can definitely say, I want you to write like Joe Rogan, or I've even asked it to write like Mark Twain, who's a literary hero of mine. And it started an article with howdy folks. And I'm like, I'm never going to, that's not my style. I didn't go any further, but, may have even used the N word, which is a little bit more popular back then. But, that just goes to show you could get some horrific results.
Well, look, as we were talking about off camera earlier on, you look at great guitar players and we were using the whole, let's not totally guitar nerd out, but we were using the whole Stevie Ray Vaughan thing. Like I watch a guy like that and there's something otherworldly about the voice that people have. And I guess that's the comparison is you can listen to different style of music, you can listen to different ways of writing, and sometimes you don't even know why it works, but they have captured, you can hear their voice, you can capture their voice and it works. And the audience, I think an audience is drawn to that. Sometimes they mightn't even know why they're drawn to that. But they like that. They like how they're saying, what they're saying and how they're saying it. And and that's how you build good audience and good engagement.
Well, if you think about music industry, you have the Grammy Awards for how many records you sell, but there's no award to say this person is better than that person. Stevie Ray Vaughan is better than Jimi Hendrix, or, Eddie Van Halen is better than Tommy Emmanuel, because the voice is like no one is better than the other. It's just different. And, that I think is what makes the world special. To finish us off, Kieran, what advice do you have for the bloody poor consumer at home that wants to educate themselves, specifically if we're talking about property? Where do they go to find things without bias? Where do they go to get information that can help them? Are there publications that are better than others, or is it incumbent on them to find a person that kind of speaks to them outside of the traditional media and looking at the podcasts and the website blogs and those sorts of things?
I think, look, that's a really, really good question, because traditional media still has a role to play in this. They are still held by the guardrails, more so than those who aren't. Those who haven't got to be, haven't got a code of conduct or aren't at threat of being sued for libel, can produce any old content they want with an agenda, as we've talked about. Whereas journalists still have to answer to an editorial team and probably lawyers somewhere down the track. They can't say anything blatantly wrong or outrageous. I think as people who are linked to associations that are trying to produce professionals in this industry that are being held to account. So whether that the associations we mentioned earlier, like PICA and Pippa and REBA, the Australian Property Institute, etc., climbing onto those websites and seeing the sorts of professionals that you can find that at least are going out there and purposefully seeking to be held to account, certainly will carry you a long way. And then seeing what sort of content they're producing, I think is really helpful. I think so. I also think too, which is, again, Mike, not to sing your praises, because, I don't like to do that.
No,
but
feels weird.
But when you think about the role that someone like you as a quantity surveyor plays in this industry, it's somewhat unique in that you aren't trying to sell a development and you aren't trying to sell a course. You're just giving good information. Now, yes, profile is good for your business and for yourself. That's absolutely great. But there's no dollar value in you going out and promoting the next mining boom or the high cash flow off the plan property. You've almost become like the journalist arbiter in that sense. So I think looking at other people who are in the industry who don't have an agenda and the content they're producing is going to be really important. I'd include property valuers in there, just because property valuers screw up. They can be not just booted out of the profession, they can be sued for saying the wrong thing. But if you seek out those sorts of professionals that are held to account and have a little bit more of a look at the content they're producing, I think it will do you far better than clicking on an influencer driving a Lamborghini, throwing money through the sunroof, and telling you how you can do it too. It's a scary world out there without some protections. But then I am an old man, Mike. I like my protections. I like my calm comfort. I love a hot Bex just before I have a little lie down.
Grumpy old man. Yeah. No, look, I think that's absolutely sterling advice, and we do rely on journalism. As I say, a well-functioning society has quality journalism and quality investigative journalism, and there are some conflicts when it comes to the capital model of journalism, the personal biases, the bias of what we actually are selling. So I think that's a really good way to drop us off, and some really good advice, Kieran. So thank you very much for that.
No worries.
I've had a lot of fun.
Look, if I could say anything to your audience, it's cut the journalists a little bit of slack. Their role in society is changing very quickly, but most of them are still trying to produce good news with the adequate research behind it. They certainly are not fans of producing dross for dross's sake.
Good. I was going to let the speaker 3 for the affirmative team have the final say, but of course, the purpose of this was to get a little bit cheeky journalism. But I completely agree. There's some amazing ones out there that I have the privilege of working with and consuming their content. So yeah, absolutely, I'll take that point.
Good on you. I've converted.
Cheers, mate. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Mike.